The following story is from a collection called Tales from the Old V-Dub. If you enjoy it, please like the video and maybe subscribe to the channel. If you really enjoy it, click on the link in the description below and you will be able to buy the book. This story is called Matches for Sale. Evening was drawing in, and the lamps were being lit one by one along the winding streets of the old town. A gusty wind blew along the icy river and over the arched bridge where the lonely figure of a girl stood leaning against the rail. Nina was huddled, as usual, in her old patched coat, and in front of her she held a little tray with several small boxes on it. "Matches for sale!" she cried in her little bird's voice every time a passer-by crossed the bridge. "Only a penny a box," she added for good measure, but the people mostly bundled up in their own thoughts and hurried on home without even noticing her. "My tummy hurts," said Nina to herself with a pitiful groan, but there would be nothing at all for dinner if she couldn't sell any matches, and she and her grandpa would go hungry again. She smiled, though, when she thought of her grandpa, waiting at home for her in the tiny attic room that they rented. "He will have finished making his matches for the day and will be smoking his pipe and squinting at the newspaper, waiting for his soup," she thought. And with this in mind, she resolved to stay a little longer at her post. Her grandpa used to be a famous watchmaker in the old country, but then the war had come. Nina's parents were captured, and she and Grandpa had to leave everything behind and escape on board a big ship together with Grandma. Well, it's a long and sad story, but that ship ran into some rocks and sank just before it reached safety. The sea was so rough that only a few people survived being drowned. Nina was little more than a baby then, and her grandpa had saved her by swimming to shore and dragging her behind him in a floating bucket. In the terrible rush to escape the sinking ship that night, however, Grandma had been separated from them and was never seen again. Grandpa never got over the loss. He kept a picture of Grandma over his bed and kissed it every night before going to sleep. He and Nina had tried to start a new life in this new country, but Grandpa was never a well man after that night. His chest wheezed like an old bellows, and his eyesight became so dim that his days as a watchmaker were over. They lived from day to day by selling the matches that he made, and most importantly, they still had each other. Just then, a tall, dark figure paused in front of Nina. "Ah, matches, that's what I need," said the stranger, whose eyes were hidden in the shade of his wide-brimmed hat. He picked up one of Nina's boxes, and her heart leapt at the thought that she was about to sell one. "Only a penny, sir," she piped up hopefully, but the stranger had already started on a sorry tale about a run of bad luck and not having any money. "But if I could just light a fire and get a good night's rest in the warm, then I'm certain I would be able to earn lots of pennies tomorrow, so I could pay you back then," he concluded. Nina had a kind heart and knew what it was to be cold, so she relented. "Very well, sir, just so long as you promise to pay me tomorrow then," she said, offering a weak smile. But the stranger was already on his way, clutching the matches without a backward glance, and was quickly swallowed up by the narrow streets of the town. "Wasting your time as usual, I see," came a rasping voice suddenly out of the gloom. The little girl turned to see a round old woman dressed all in black and struggling to push a rickety old cart over the cobbles towards her. The woman was puffing and panting with the effort, and then cursed as one of the wheels slipped into the gutter with a jerk, and a pile of potatoes rolled off the cart and drummed onto the pavement. Nina quickly put down her tray and rushed over to help. She crouched down and began collecting up the potatoes to put back alongside the other vegetables on the cart. "Thief!" cried the old woman, waving her arms crossly. "Get off my taters! I don't need your help!" Nina put the last potatoes sadly on the cart and wiped away a tear that was threatening to spill down her cheek. With a short sniff, she turned back to pick up her tray of matches. The old woman then seemed to check herself suddenly, putting on a pair of old round spectacles with the lenses distinctly cracked. She peered suspiciously at Nina while pretending to tidy her piles of vegetables. "Oh, for pity's sake," she finally grumbled, holding up a potato in each hand. "You must have trampled these. They're good for nothing but soup. Oh, what's the use?" And saying this, she put them roughly down on Nina's tray. "Give me some matches and you can have them, I suppose. Either that or I'll throw them in the river." Her glowering face suggested she just might do it, so Nina quickly pressed a box of matches into her rough old hands. "Oh, thank you," said Nina with a timid smile, thrusting the precious food into her pockets. "I should think so," said the woman. "They'll make a passable soup, but mind you cut them up small and don't go spoiling it with too much salt," she almost shouted. "Now get along with you and stop scaring off all my customers," muttered the old woman as she unfolded an equally rickety-looking wooden seat behind her cart and sat down on it with a grunt of annoyance. Nina looked up and down the deserted streets without comment before gratefully hurrying off home. "Sorry I'm late, Grandpa. I'll soon have dinner ready," called Nina when she got home and immediately began to busy herself in their tiny kitchen. Very soon she was placing a large bowl of steaming potato soup in front of him. "Would you bring the salt, dear?" asked Grandpa, licking his lips. "Mustn't spoil it now, Grandpa," said Nina, waving her spoon at him. Grandpa didn't reply, but a faraway look came into his eyes, and Nina noticed he was smiling softly to himself as he ate his soup. "Reminds me of home," was all he said. The following day was even colder, and as Nina wrapped up to go out selling matches again, her grandpa gave her a big hug. All day she waited on the bridge with her little tray. First on this side, then on the other, she tried to keep her back to the cold wind. There was snow in the air. Late in the afternoon, along came the old woman again. She shivered in her thin black dress as she stopped her cart opposite Nina and sat down, rubbing her hands together without so much as a hello. People were now drifting past on their way home from work, looking to buy some food for their evening meals. Nina looked on enviously as the old woman sold her vegetables to one person after another. Finally, someone stopped by Nina's tray. But it was the dark stranger again, and he still seemed to have no money. "I know I said I would pay you back, and there's no one more sorry than me, but if you could just let me take one more box to light a fire. It's my children, you see. They get so cold at home, and they feel it more because their tummies are so empty." "Rest assured, my brother is going to lend me a shilling tomorrow, and all my debts will be paid. I promise." The thought of the man's cold, hungry children was too much for Nina, and so, with a sigh, she held out a box of matches to him. On the other side of the bridge, she noticed that the old woman was peering hard at them through her cracked glasses and shaking her head with a disgusted look. "Were you born yesterday, you foolish girl?" shouted the old woman. "You stand here all day without selling a single match, and then you give them away to a... But she couldn't finish, because at that moment she burst into a fit of coughing that shook her whole body. Nina hurried across the bridge towards her, and for the first time noticed how frail and weak the old woman looked. "Oh, but you're freezing," said Nina, feeling the old woman's rough hands. "Let me give you some matches so you can have a nice fire when you get home." "What do I want with matches?" snapped the old woman, snatching her hands away. "Do you see anything to burn here?" Nina had taken off her own coat, old and patched as it was, and had quickly wrapped it snugly around the old woman. The coughing gradually stopped, and the old woman looked critically at the coat. "Young people don't feel the cold, it seems. But I do know they're constantly eating," she muttered, rummaging on her cart. "So here, take these parsnips. They're a funny shape, so no doubt I'll be lumbered with them otherwise. If you make them into a soup, you'll never know the difference. But don't spoil it by making it lumpy. There's nothing worse." Whilst saying this, the old woman had hurriedly packed up her stool, and these words were shouted loudly over her shoulder as she trundled the cart away up the cobbled street. Nina watched her disappear beyond the feeble glow of the last street lamp before collecting her tray of matches, carefully making room there for the parsnips. In her mind, she pictured her dear old grandpa patiently waiting for his supper, doing his best to keep warm by sitting under the bedclothes. When Nina arrived home, she kissed her grandpa, lit the little fire for him, and immediately busied herself in the tiny kitchen. "Ah," said Grandpa a little later, slurping the parsnip soup. "Lovely and smooth. Reminds me of long ago." Nina smiled back at him, but noticed that his eyes looked moist in the candlelight. The next morning, Grandpa packed Nina's tray with fresh-made matches as she prepared to set off for the day. "Christmas tomorrow, my girl," he said with a cheery wink. "People will need matches for sure." But then, as he went to give her a goodbye hug, he suddenly drew back. "Where's your coat, my dear?" he said, concerned. "Oh, yes, I lent it to somebody for a while," said Nina sheepishly. "Don't worry though, Grandpa. I'll be fine with my warm jumper, and spring will be here before you know it." Grandpa didn't look convinced, but before he could say another word, Nina was quickly out of the door with a cheery wave. That day was much like all the others, except Nina did sell lots of matches, just as her grandpa had said she would. When she looked at the shiny pennies on her tray, Nina didn't feel the cold wind quite so much, and every time she sold some matches, she wished the person a happy Christmas, and they wished her one back. The old woman was also doing a brisk trade as people stocked up for their Christmas dinners. But every time one of her customers wished her a happy Christmas, she said, "I don't know what's so happy about it, sir," or "Fat chance of that, I'm afraid, madam." As evening fell, Nina had only one box of matches left when the dark stranger crossed the bridge and stopped once more before her tray. Nina tried without success to see the stranger's eyes, hidden as they were by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. At the same time, the old woman had wrestled on her cracked glasses and was creeping across the bridge with a glowering face. Now I know I said about the shilling, began the stranger, but all at once his hat was knocked clean off his head by a well-aimed and quite mouldy turnip. Despite her glasses falling to the cobbles from their exertions, the old woman was straight away taking aim again. "Get away with you, you no-good snake in the grass!" she yelled, and launched a rotten cabbage full in the stranger's startled face. Nina looked on astonished as the old woman leapt about after the frightened figure, who left his hat behind and broke into a desperate run. This didn't save him from a final direct hit from a large and very squashy-looking tomato. Nina picked up the old woman's glasses, perhaps even more cracked, if that's possible, from their fall. "What can possibly be the use of such a broken pair of glasses?" said Nina to herself, as the old woman continued shaking her fist and cursing loudly after the fleeing stranger. "Can they be better than no glasses at all?" And saying this, she held them up in front of her eyes and tried to focus on the old woman, who was now shuffling towards her, out of breath. What Nina saw through the cracked glasses made her gasp. Where the old woman stood, she saw for just a moment not a poor figure dressed in shabby clothes, but a beautiful woman with long blonde hair shining in a white summer dress. "I'll take those, thank you," snapped the old woman, snatching back the glasses. "Things look so different through them. Are they magic?" was all Nina could say, still shocked by what she had seen. "Things look as they really are," said the old woman. "Both good and bad, the glasses never lie. That's how I know that fellow was a heartless thief, whereas you, well, you are a good girl. Through these, I don't see your rags, but I do see your pure heart, and that's why I help you sometimes," she concluded, looking away with a haughty sniff. "Apart from that, they're damned useless. That stupid fortune teller, she couldn't have crossed my palm with silver or anything useful like that. Oh no. She just lumbered me with this pair of trick glasses. Some thank you that was." "Thank you for what?" said Nina. "I'd saved the old girl from drowning, if you must know. Towed her ashore, I did, in an old bathtub that floated up from our stupid ship after it sank." Nina now saw tears glistening in the old woman's eyes as she went on. "I lost everything that night. My husband, my granddaughter, both drowned. It's been hard to keep on living, if you must know. Well, but what are you gawping at now, child?" All at once, it was as if Nina had been struck by a thunderbolt. She leapt up in a sudden panic, and grabbing the glasses from the old woman's hands, she held them up to her own eyes once again. Then she could only stare wide-eyed and open-mouthed. It was true! In front of her she saw the kind, beautiful face from the photo above Grandpa's bed. Nina gave a cry of joy and threw her arms around the old woman, who gave a shriek of horror. "What on earth are you doing? Have you gone mad, child?" "Maybe I have," said Nina, hurriedly packing up her tray with trembling hands. "But now I want you to listen to me carefully." The old woman was taken aback, but waited for her to continue. "It's Christmas Eve, and you and I have worked long enough. I want you to please come with me now, as there's somebody I really think you should meet." The old woman scoffed rudely at this suggestion, however, and shooed Nina away. "I can't go gallivanting off willy-nilly. I still have all this to sell," she protested, and they both turned to look at her cart, still piled high with vegetables. "I promise it'll be worth your while," urged Nina, "but you must come with me right now and bring enough food for a feast." As she said this, she smiled so widely and her face shone so brightly that the old woman thought she had better do as she was told. So they set off, the pair of them pushing the rickety cart together this time, over the little bridge and off down the winding street towards home. The old woman grumbled and dragged her feet all the way. She couldn't imagine who it could be that she had to desert her pitch and come all this way to meet them. But Nina would give nothing away and only said, "You'll see, there will be a warm welcome for such an important guest as yourself." "Humbug!" chided the old woman. But her curiosity now had the better of her, so she followed her strange new friend all the way to the poorest part of town, and finally to the ramshackle building where she lived. Then followed an eternity of creaky stairs to climb, the old woman puffing and panting and threatening to turn back at each landing. "Nearly there," Nina urged her on. "We're on the next floor." "Who's we?" quizzed the old woman, eyeing Nina suspiciously whilst she caught her breath. "I don't like surprises." "I think you might like this one," said Nina, taking hold of her hand. "Come on now, let's go up together." You can imagine the scene that unfolded when Nina opened the door to Grandpa's little room. It took less time than a heartbeat for the man and wife to recognise each other, even though so many years had passed. They tried to cry out, to speak, but they were so overcome they couldn't produce a single sound, and as they fell into each other's arms, their eyes overflowed with silent tears of joy. Nina watched all this with her hands clasped together and her heart bursting. Only one thing could make this more perfect, she thought to herself. So she dashed downstairs again and collected as much food from the vegetable cart as she could carry. The little kitchen was soon filled with the wonderful aroma as Nina made an especially hearty soup, for 3 people this time. As they sat around the little table eating, Nina's grandma reached over and patted her cheek tenderly. "Your soup is every bit as good as mine," she said softly, and then with a twinkle in her eye she added, "It's a wonder your grandpa hasn't got fat." Now that they had recovered their voices, all the long stories could be told of all that had happened to each of them, how they had lost each other, and how through this miracle they had found each other again. There was more good fortune in the coming days, as it turned out that with a few repairs, Grandma's magic eyeglasses were able to give Grandpa back his eyesight as sharp as ever. Before too long, he was working as a master watchmaker once again and was much in demand for miles around. Thanks to the money he earned, their days of cold and hunger were finally over. Nina was bought some fine new clothes to replace her old torn ones, and since she no longer had to work selling matches, she was able to go back and finish school. Eventually, the 3 of them were able to move to a nice house of their own with a little workshop in the garden for Grandpa. After their long separation, the family never liked to be apart for very long, and they all lived happily together for many years to come. In time, Nina would tell the story to her own children of how her grandparents had found each other again on that fateful Christmas Eve.